I never imagined that a piece of land my family had owned for nearly a century could disappear with nothing more than a few signatures and a confident smile from an HOA president. My name is Daniel Carter, and everything started on what should have been an ordinary Saturday morning. I drove out to the 72 acres my grandfather had left me just outside our quiet neighborhood. The property wasn't part of any fancy subdivision. It wasn't covered with expensive homes or luxury amenities. It was open land filled with old oak trees, a small creek, rolling hills, and a weathered red barn that had stood there longer than anyone in town could remember. My grandfather always called it the family's insurance policy because no matter how hard times became, that land would always belong to us. He made me promise never to sell it, never to divide it, and never to let anyone convince me it wasn't ours. I laughed when he first said it because I couldn't imagine anyone trying to steal an entire piece of land. Looking back now, I realize he knew exactly what people were capable of. When I reached the entrance that morning, my truck rolled to a stop. Fresh wooden stakes had been hammered into the ground. Bright orange construction ribbons stretched across the driveway. A large professionally printed sign stood in the middle of my entrance that read, Future Community Recreation Area. Authorized by the Homeowners Association. I stared at it for several seconds, convinced someone had made a mistake. Then I noticed bulldozers parked near my old barn and survey crews walking across my pasture as if they owned the place. My heart sank. I climbed out of my truck and demanded to know who had given them permission to be there. One of the workers shrugged and handed me a stack of documents. According to the paperwork, the HOA claimed my family's property had always been designated as common community land under a revised neighborhood development plan. They insisted the previous records had contained mapping errors and that the HOA had recently corrected the boundaries. In one unbelievable sentence, they declared my 72 acres were now legally part of the community. I laughed because I honestly believed it was some kind of prank. But nobody else was laughing. Within an hour I was sitting across from the HOA president, a woman named Victoria Hale. She smiled politely, folded her hands across a polished conference table, and calmly explained that the association had completed an extensive title review. She claimed several historical boundary maps proved my family's land was actually reserved as future recreational space decades ago. According to her, my grandfather had occupied the property by mistake all those years. She even said they were willing to let me remove personal belongings before construction officially began. She acted like she was doing me a favor while stealing generations of my family's history. I demanded copies of every document she relied on. She slid a folder toward me with complete confidence. Every page looked official. Every survey carried professional stamps. Every map appeared legitimate. If I hadn't grown up walking every inch of that land with my grandfather, I might have believed her. My attorney studied the documents for 2 days before giving me terrible news. On paper, everything seemed surprisingly convincing. The maps matched. The signatures appeared authentic. Even county references lined up. He warned me that fighting this could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars with no guarantee of winning. Most people would have accepted a settlement and walked away. I couldn't. That land wasn't just dirt. It held my family's memories. My parents planted trees there when I was a child. My grandfather taught me to ride horses across those fields. My grandmother's ashes rested beneath the largest oak overlooking the creek. Every corner meant something. I wasn't losing it because someone printed new maps. The next several weeks became a nightmare. Construction fencing surrounded sections of my property. The HOA announced plans for walking trails, picnic areas, playgrounds, and a luxury clubhouse expansion. Neighbors began congratulating the board for adding more community amenities. Some even accused me of trying to block neighborhood improvements for personal greed. Social media made everything worse. Photos of me arguing with survey crews spread across local community groups. People who had never met me called me selfish. Others claimed I was occupying land that belonged to everyone. The HOA carefully controlled the narrative, presenting themselves as responsible leaders simply correcting an old mistake. But something bothered me. Every survey they produced looked too perfect. My grandfather had spent 40 years working alongside county surveyors. I remembered him telling stories about old property markers buried beneath rocks, fence posts, and giant trees long before modern GPS existed. He once told me that no forged document could erase a genuine survey monument placed by the original government survey teams. That sentence echoed in my head. I returned to the property carrying old family journals, faded photographs, and a rusted metal detector my grandfather used decades earlier. Everyone thought I was wasting my time. Construction crews laughed as I wandered through waist-high grass searching for something invisible. 3 days passed with nothing. On the fourth afternoon, while comparing an 80-year-old family photograph with the landscape around me, I noticed something unusual. An enormous white oak leaned slightly toward the creek in exactly the same direction shown in the picture. The tree had grown tremendously over the decades, but it hadn't moved. My grandfather once carved initials into that tree. They were still there. Suddenly I remembered another story he'd told me as a child. He said the original government survey marker rested exactly 36 feet east of the old oak beneath a pile of limestone rocks. Those rocks had long disappeared. Or so everyone believed. I spent hours digging carefully beneath layers of dirt and roots until my shovel struck metal. Clang! I froze. After brushing away decades of packed soil, I uncovered a heavy brass survey monument stamped with the county seal and the original survey year. It was exactly where my grandfather said it would be. I immediately contacted the county survey office. Within days, licensed government surveyors arrived with advanced equipment. They measured every angle, every coordinate, and every boundary using both historical records and modern technology. The results stunned everyone. The original monument proved my family's property lines had never changed. Not by 1 inch. The HOA's revised maps ignored the monument completely. Even worse, investigators discovered something far more disturbing. The HOA had hired a private consulting company that created entirely new boundary maps without ever performing a legitimate field survey. Instead of locating the original monuments required by law, they relied on digital estimates that conveniently shifted property lines directly into my land. The deeper investigators looked, the uglier things became. Several signatures authorizing revised plats belonged to retired officials who had never signed the documents. Dates didn't match. Reference numbers pointed to unrelated filings. Entire pages appeared copied from older county records with critical details digitally altered. The fraud was beginning to unravel. News spread quickly. Neighbors who once criticized me started asking questions. County officials suspended every construction permit tied to the project. Independent forensic document experts confirmed multiple maps had been manipulated after certification. Then came the discovery that changed everything. Financial investigators uncovered emails showing certain HOA board members had secretly negotiated with a commercial developer months before claiming my land belonged to the community. Their real plan had never been a park. The recreational project was only temporary. Once ownership transferred to the HOA, large sections would quietly be sold for luxury townhomes worth millions of dollars. The community had almost been tricked into supporting the theft of private land. Court proceedings lasted months. Every hearing revealed another layer of deception. Witnesses admitted they never verified original monuments. Consultants blamed HOA leadership. Board members blamed consultants. Developers claimed they relied on information provided by the HOA. Meanwhile, the brass survey marker sat inside the courtroom like an unmovable witness. That forgotten piece of metal buried beneath the soil for generations carried more legal authority than every forged map combined. The judge's final ruling left no room for interpretation. The HOA's claims were declared fraudulent. Every altered survey was void. Construction approvals were cancelled. The association faced enormous financial penalties, legal sanctions, and civil lawsuits from homeowners who realized similar boundary adjustments had affected smaller parcels throughout the neighborhood. Several board members resigned before disciplinary proceedings even concluded. The consulting company lost its professional licenses. Criminal investigators opened separate inquiries into document fraud and conspiracy. As for me, I drove back through the entrance to my land a few weeks later. The construction equipment was gone. The orange fencing had disappeared. Fresh grass had already begun covering the tire tracks left by bulldozers. I walked to the old oak tree carrying the brass survey monument after county officials temporarily returned it for documentation photographs. I stood quietly beside the creek where my grandfather used to fish and finally understood why he made me promise never to abandon this place. He never expected me to fight weeds or storms. He expected me to fight people. That old survey marker wasn't valuable because it was made of brass. It mattered because truth can survive underground longer than lies survive in daylight. Today the monument rests safely in county archives while an official replacement marks the exact same location on my property. Every licensed survey now begins there. Every future boundary depends on it. What the HOA tried to erase became the very evidence that destroyed their entire scheme. Whenever visitors ask why I never sold the land after everything that happened, I simply smile and point toward the giant oak standing over the hillside. Beneath its roots lies the place where one forgotten marker protected nearly a century of family history. People often believe fraud succeeds because it's carefully planned. But sometimes all it takes is one honest piece of evidence, buried beneath decades of dirt, waiting for someone stubborn enough to keep digging. And that is exactly why my family's land is still ours today.